The 12th of June, 2019, is a date seared into the collective memory of Hong Kong. It began with an air of anxious anticipation as tens of thousands, many of them young students, gathered around the Legislative Council complex. They were there to protest a proposed extradition bill, a piece of legislation that many feared would fatally undermine the city's cherished judicial independence and expose its residents to the opaque legal system of mainland China. The atmosphere was initially resolute, a sea of black-clad demonstrators determined to make their voices heard against a government they felt was increasingly deaf to their concerns about eroding freedoms. This was not merely about one bill, it was about the future of Hong Kong's unique identity. What followed shattered any illusions of a peaceful resolution that day. As the crowd swelled, the police response escalated dramatically. Tear gas, a suffocating cloud that would become a grimly familiar sight in the months to come, was deployed with little warning. Rubber bullets and beanbag rounds were fired into the largely peaceful assembly, turning streets usually bustling with commerce and daily life into scenes of chaos and confrontation. The sight of young people, armed with little more than umbrellas and face masks, facing down heavily armed riot police sent shockwaves through the city and across the globe. The government's refusal to withdraw the bill had ignited a firestorm. The events of 6/12 were a pivotal turning point. For many Hong Kongers, it was the moment the government, and by extension Beijing, demonstrated its willingness to use significant force against its own people to impose its will. The trust between the populace and the authorities, already strained, was irrevocably broken. The police, once respected as Asia's finest, were now widely viewed by protesters as instruments of state repression. This single day galvanized the protest movement, transforming it from a specific objection to a bill into a broader, more desperate struggle for democratic freedoms and autonomy that had been promised to the city. The significance of 6/12 extends far beyond the immediate injuries and arrests. It marked the end of an era of relative calm and the beginning of a period of sustained, often violent unrest that would convulse Hong Kong for months. It fueled a deeper sense of alienation among a generation of young people who saw their future being decided without their consent. The raw images and visceral experiences of that day became a rallying cry, hardening resolve and drawing hundreds of thousands, even millions, onto the streets in subsequent demonstrations. The fight for Hong Kong's soul had begun in earnest, and the echoes of 6/12 continue to reverberate even now, years later. To understand the deep-seated anxieties that exploded onto the streets in 2019, one must look back at Hong Kong's unique and often paradoxical history under British colonial rule. For over 150 years, from 1841 until the handover to China in 1997, Hong Kong was a British Crown colony. Under British administration, the city transformed from a sparsely populated collection of fishing villages into a global financial hub, renowned for its efficiency, rule of law, and vibrant capitalist economy. Yet, this stability and prosperity came without one crucial ingredient: full democracy. The foundations of a free society were laid, but the democratic architecture remained incomplete. Throughout the colonial period, governors were appointed by London, not elected by the people of Hong Kong. While legislative bodies existed, their members were largely appointed or chosen through limited franchise elections, effectively excluding the general populace from directly choosing their leaders. This denial of universal suffrage before the handover is a significant point of contention, and for many, a historical grievance. Britain, the mother of parliamentary democracy, established robust legal and administrative systems, but stopped short of granting Hong Kong the right to fully govern itself. This democratic deficit left a lingering vulnerability, a sense that Hong Kong's freedoms were granted, not inherent, and therefore could be easily withdrawn. The reasons cited for withholding full democracy were complex, often invoking the geopolitical realities of Hong Kong's proximity to mainland China and the need for stability. London feared that rapid democratization might provoke Beijing, particularly after the Communist Party came to power in China in 1949. However, this cautious approach meant that when the time came to negotiate Hong Kong's future with China, the city's people had little experience with full democratic participation and lacked the entrenched institutions that might have better safeguarded their autonomy. The seeds of future conflict were sown in this historical compromise, a compromise made largely without the direct consent of those whose futures were being decided. Thus, the Hong Kong that was handed back to China was a city accustomed to extensive civil liberties, freedom of speech, assembly, and the press, but not to the political mechanisms to protect them robustly. Its people were educated, globally connected, and possessed a strong sense of a distinct Hong Kong identity, yet they remained subjects rather than citizens in a fully democratic sense. This legacy of unfulfilled democratic promise created a fertile ground for the anxieties that would later erupt when Beijing's influence began to encroach more assertively upon the freedoms Hong Kongers had come to expect as their birthright. A birthright paradoxically nurtured under colonial rule but never fully realized. The future of Hong Kong after the end of British rule was formally sealed with the signing of the Sino-British Joint Declaration in 1984. This international treaty, lodged with the United Nations, laid out the terms for the 1997 handover of sovereignty to the People's Republic of China. The core promise of the Joint Declaration was the one country, two systems principle. This framework was designed to ensure that Hong Kong would maintain a high degree of autonomy for at least 50 years after 1997, retaining its capitalist system, legal framework based on common law, and fundamental rights and freedoms, including freedom of speech, assembly, and the press. The Basic Law, Hong Kong's mini-constitution, was subsequently drafted to codify these promises. However, the Joint Declaration, while ambitious in its scope, suffered from inherent weaknesses. Critically, it lacked a robust enforcement mechanism or international oversight to ensure Beijing's adherence to its commitments. The United Kingdom, as the departing colonial power, was seen by many as having placed too much faith in Beijing's goodwill, failing to secure stronger international guarantees for Hong Kong's autonomy. As the years passed and Beijing's interpretation of one country, two systems began to diverge significantly from that understood by many Hong Kongers, and indeed, the spirit of the agreement, the limitations of the Joint Declaration became painfully apparent. It was a promise on paper, but its real-world resilience was increasingly tested. In the lead-up to the handover, the British government introduced the British National Overseas Passport in 1987. This document was offered to Hong Kong British Dependent Territory citizens, allowing them to retain a form of British nationality after 1997. However, the original BNO passport was a source of considerable controversy and disappointment for many. Crucially, it did not grant the right of abode in the United Kingdom. It was primarily a travel document, offering limited consular protection, but denying its holders the full rights and security that come with citizenship. Many Hong Kongers viewed it as a second-class status, a token gesture that managed potential outflow rather than genuinely ensuring their welfare or providing a meaningful safety net. This decision to restrict right of abode for BNO passport holders was widely perceived as Britain shirking its moral responsibilities to the people it had governed for over a century. It contrasted sharply with the full citizenship rights often extended to residents of other former colonies. For those anxious about the future under Chinese rule, the BNO passport felt like an inadequate shield, a symbol of Britain's desire to disengage rather than to stand firmly by its former subjects. This sense of being left vulnerable, with a passport that offered a connection to Britain but no secure haven, would linger and resurface with renewed urgency decades later, when the promises of the Joint Declaration began to visibly crumble under pressure from Beijing. Just a few years after the Sino-British Joint Declaration was signed, and as arrangements for the BNO passport were being finalized, a seismic event shook the world and should have served as a stark warning regarding Beijing's approach to dissent: the Tiananmen Square massacre of June 4, 1989. Hundreds, possibly thousands of unarmed pro-democracy protesters, many of them students, were brutally suppressed by the People's Liberation Army in the heart of Beijing. The images of tanks rolling into the square and the violent crackdown on peaceful demonstrators sent a chilling message about the lengths to which the Chinese Communist Party would go to maintain its grip on power and silence calls for political reform. For the people of Hong Kong, who watched the events unfold with horror and deep sympathy, Tiananmen was a profoundly traumatic experience. Massive demonstrations were held in the colony in support of the Beijing students, and the crackdown crystallized fears about their own future under Chinese sovereignty, which was then less than a decade away. If the Chinese Communist Party could react with such brutality against its own citizens on the mainland demanding basic freedoms, what guarantees did Hong Kong truly have, despite the promises enshrined in the Joint Declaration? The massacre instilled a deep-seated distrust of Beijing's intentions and a heightened awareness of the fragility of their own promised autonomy. Despite this clear and brutal demonstration of the CCP's intolerance for political opposition, the United Kingdom's response in terms of bolstering protections for Hong Kongers was widely seen as insufficient. While there were some limited measures, such as the British Nationality Selection Scheme, which granted full British citizenship to a select group of 50,000 key individuals and their families, there was no comprehensive contingency plan or a substantial insurance policy put in place for the wider population of BNO passport holders. The opportunity to significantly upgrade the BNO status at that point to provide a genuine right of abode as a safeguard was largely missed. This failure to act decisively after Tiananmen is often cited as a critical misjudgment and a neglect of moral obligation by the UK government. The massacre should have been an unambiguous signal to prepare for the worst-case scenario, to ensure that Hong Kongers had a viable escape route should Beijing renege on its promises. Instead, the prevailing approach seemed to be one of cautious diplomacy and a hope that China would moderate. As we approach the 36th anniversary of Tiananmen in June 2025, its echoes resonate powerfully with the subsequent erosion of freedoms in Hong Kong, serving as a grim reminder of a warning that was, for too long, insufficiently heeded by those who held responsibility for the city's future. The anxieties that simmered beneath the surface in Hong Kong did not begin. In 2019, they had been building for years, fueled by Beijing's steadily encroaching influence and a growing frustration over the slow pace, or, honestly, the outright denial, of promised democratic reforms. The Basic Law, Hong Kong's mini-constitution, stated that the ultimate aim was the selection of the chief executive and all members of the Legislative Council by universal suffrage. However, efforts to achieve this were consistently stymied or diluted by Beijing, leading to a growing sense among many, particularly the younger generation, that the high degree of autonomy was a promise continually deferred and diminished. A significant precursor to the 2019 upheaval was the 2014 Umbrella Movement. This 79-day occupation of major city thoroughfares was sparked by Beijing's decision to allow a one-person, one-vote election for the chief executive, but only from a slate of candidates pre-approved by a pro-Beijing nominating committee. For pro-democracy activists, this was a betrayal of the promise of genuine universal suffrage. While the Umbrella Movement ultimately failed to achieve its immediate political goals, it was a watershed moment. It politicized a new generation of young Hong Kongers, highlighted the deep divisions within society, and demonstrated the public's willingness to engage in civil disobedience to defend their perceived rights. The period between the Umbrella Movement and the 2019 protests saw a further tightening of Beijing's control. Booksellers critical of the Chinese Communist Party disappeared only to reappear in mainland custody. Elected pro-democracy lawmakers were disqualified from office. The space for dissent was visibly shrinking. The proposed extradition bill in 2019 was therefore not an isolated issue. It was seen as the culmination of this trend, a final straw that threatened to dismantle the legal firewall between Hong Kong and mainland China. The sheer scale of the initial protests against the bill, drawing over 1 million people onto the streets, demonstrated the depth of public fear and anger. The government's intransigence in the face of such massive public opposition, coupled with the aggressive police tactics witnessed on June 12th and subsequently transformed the protests from peaceful marches into a more sustained and often confrontational movement. The demands broadened from the withdrawal of the bill to include calls for an independent inquiry into police conduct, the release of arrested protesters, and the implementation of genuine universal suffrage. The city became engulfed in months of unrest, with clashes between protesters and police becoming a regular feature of life. What began as a defense of existing freedoms evolved into a desperate, last-ditch struggle for the very soul of Hong Kong, a fight against what many saw as the inexorable erosion of their way of life. The months of protest and unrest that began in June 2019 culminated in a decisive and far-reaching response from Beijing, the imposition of the national security law on Hong Kong in June 2020. This legislation was enacted directly by Beijing, bypassing Hong Kong's own legislative council, a move that itself signaled a profound disregard for the city's promised autonomy. The national security law criminalizes acts of secession, subversion, terrorism, and collusion with foreign forces, with offenses carrying potential sentences of up to life imprisonment. Crucially, the definitions of these crimes are deliberately vague and broadly interpretable, creating a chilling effect across society. The impact of the national security law was immediate and draconian. It effectively silenced opposition voices and dismantled the city's vibrant civil society almost overnight. Pro-democracy political parties and organizations disbanded, fearing prosecution. Prominent activists, politicians, journalists, and academics were arrested and imprisoned, often on charges that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. Independent media outlets, such as Apple Daily and Stand News, were forced to close under immense pressure, their assets frozen and senior staff arrested. The law created a pervasive climate of fear and self-censorship, where even ordinary citizens became wary of expressing dissenting opinions, whether in public, online, or even in private conversations. The rule of law, once a cornerstone of Hong Kong's success, has been severely undermined. The national security law allows for cases to be tried by specially designated judges, and in certain circumstances, defendants can even be transferred to mainland China for trial, completely bypassing Hong Kong's common law system. The presumption of innocence and the right to a fair trial have come under immense strain. International observers and legal experts have widely condemned the law as a tool to crush dissent and bring Hong Kong firmly under Beijing's authoritarian control, fundamentally altering the one country, two systems framework far ahead of its intended 2047 expiry. Life in Hong Kong now is starkly different from the city that existed before 2020. The vibrant street protests are gone, replaced by an uneasy quiet. Public displays of dissent are rare and swiftly suppressed. Annual vigils, such as the commemoration of the Tiananmen Square massacre, which once drew tens of thousands to Victoria Park, are now banned. The freedoms of speech, assembly, and the press, which Hong Kongers cherished and fought to protect, have been drastically curtailed. The national security law has not just changed laws, it has fundamentally reshaped the city's identity and the daily lives of its people, forcing many to make the painful decision to seek a future elsewhere. The sweeping changes imposed on Hong Kong, particularly since the enactment of the national security law, have led some observers to draw unsettling parallels with aspects of China's Cultural Revolution, which took place from 1966 to 1976. While Hong Kong is not experiencing the same scale of violent mass upheaval that characterized that dark period in mainland Chinese history, certain tactics and trends bear a disturbing resemblance. The primary similarity lies in the systematic silencing of dissent and the demand for absolute ideological conformity. Criticism of the government or its policies, once a hallmark of Hong Kong's open society, is now fraught with peril, labeled as subversion or a threat to national security. Another area of concern is the rewriting of history and the imposition of a singular, state-sanctioned narrative. School textbooks are being revised to promote a patriotic education, aligning Hong Kong's history more closely with Beijing's official version, and downplaying or omitting events deemed sensitive by the Chinese Communist Party, such as the Tiananmen Square massacre or aspects of colonial rule. There is a growing emphasis on loyalty to the central government and the cultivation of a national identity that subsumes Hong Kong's unique local identity. This mirrors the Cultural Revolution's attempts to eradicate old thinking and impose ideological purity, where historical narratives were manipulated to serve political ends. The pressure on intellectuals, educators, and cultural figures is also reminiscent of that era. Academics who express views critical of the government face censure, dismissal, or even arrest. Teachers are under scrutiny to ensure their loyalty and adherence to the new patriotic education curriculum. Artists and writers practice self-censorship, fearing that their work could be interpreted as violating the vague tenets of the national security law. This targeting of those who shape public discourse and educate the next generation aims to mold a society that is unquestioningly loyal to the state, a tactic extensively used during the Cultural Revolution to consolidate power and eliminate perceived ideological enemies. While direct comparisons must be made with caution, the emphasis on ideological purity, the suppression of alternative viewpoints, the reshaping of historical memory, and the pressure on the education system in Hong Kong today evoke uncomfortable echoes of methods employed during the Cultural Revolution. Analysts suggest that China's current leadership under Xi Jinping has, at times, drawn from this playbook to consolidate control, emphasizing loyalty and cracking down on any perceived challenge to the party's authority. For many Hong Kongers, these developments are not merely abstract political shifts, but a deeply unsettling transformation of their society, eroding the very foundations of their way of life and prompting a reevaluation of their future in the city. In response to the deteriorating freedoms in Hong Kong and the imposition of the national security law, the British government launched a new visa scheme in January 2021 for British national overseas status holders and their eligible family members. This BNO visa offers a pathway to settlement in the United Kingdom and eventually British citizenship. It was a significant policy shift, effectively acknowledging the UK's historical and moral obligations to the people of Hong Kong in light of Beijing's clear breach of the Sino-British Joint Declaration. For many Hong Kongers facing an increasingly repressive environment, the BNO visa scheme represented a crucial lifeline, an opportunity to rebuild their lives in a country that promised to uphold the freedoms they had lost. Hundreds of thousands of Hong Kongers have since applied for the BNO visa, embarking on the daunting journey of uprooting their lives and moving to the United Kingdom. These newcomers represent a diverse cross-section of Hong Kong society, families with young children, professionals, students, and retirees. They bring with them a wide range of skills, experiences, and perhaps most importantly, a deep yearning for freedom and stability. While for some, the BNO scheme was seen as too little, too late, a belated recognition of responsibility after decades of an inadequate BNO passport, for many others, it was a welcome and essential escape route from an increasingly untenable situation. Life for these new arrivals in the United Kingdom, however, is not without its challenges. Many face significant hurdles in integrating into a new society. Language barriers can be an issue, even for those with some English proficiency, particularly in navigating complex administrative processes or finding employment commensurate with their skills and experience. Securing suitable housing, accessing healthcare, and enrolling children in schools are common concerns. The cultural differences between Hong Kong and the United Kingdom, while perhaps not as vast as with some other migrations, still require adjustment. Furthermore, recent anxieties about potential changes to United Kingdom immigration rules and the rising cost of living add layers of uncertainty to their settlement process. Despite these struggles, there is also a palpable sense of hope and determination among the Hong Konger community in the United Kingdom. They are actively building new lives, establishing community groups, starting businesses, and contributing to British society. They cherish the freedoms they now enjoy, the freedom to speak their minds, to access uncensored information, and to participate in civic life without fear of reprisal. Many are driven by a desire to preserve Hong Kong's unique culture and identity, even in exile, and to ensure their children can grow up in an environment where critical thinking and democratic values are respected. Their journey is one of resilience, adaptation, and a quiet rebuilding. The arrival of tens of thousands of Hong Kongers in the United Kingdom under the BNO visa scheme is not merely a matter of immigration policy. It is a direct consequence of historical commitments and a stark reminder of Britain's enduring moral obligations. The Sino-British Joint Declaration was a solemn promise not just to China, but to the people of Hong Kong, guaranteeing their way of life and fundamental freedoms. Beijing's systematic dismantling of these freedoms constitutes a clear breach of that treaty, and the United Kingdom, as a signatory, has a profound responsibility to act. The BNO visa scheme is a vital step in honoring this duty, but it must be seen as part of an ongoing commitment. This duty extends beyond simply opening a door. It involves ensuring that those who have sought refuge are given the support they need to thrive. This includes practical assistance with integration, such as language support, employment advice, and help navigating public services. It means fostering a welcoming environment, free from discrimination, where Hong Kongers can rebuild their lives with dignity and security. The United Kingdom government and civil society organizations have a crucial role to play in facilitating this process, recognizing the trauma many have experienced and the immense courage it has taken for them to start anew. This is a debt long overdue. Furthermore, the United Kingdom's responsibility does not end at its borders. It must continue to speak out unequivocally against the ongoing erosion of human rights and freedoms in Hong Kong. It must work with international partners to hold Beijing accountable for its breaches and to support those who continue to advocate for democracy and the rule of law within Hong Kong, however perilous that may be. The international community cannot afford to let the plight of Hong Kong fade from view, nor can it accept the normalization of repression in a city that was once a beacon of freedom and openness in Asia. The fight for Hong Kong's values continues, both within its borders and among its diaspora. The story of Hong Kongers rebuilding their lives in the United Kingdom is a testament to their resilience and their unwavering desire for liberty. It is also a chapter in Britain's own story, a test of its commitment to its historical responsibilities and its proclaimed values of freedom, democracy, and the rule of law. Continued support for newcomers and for Hong Kong's autonomy is not merely a matter of policy, but a moral imperative. The promise made to Hong Kong remains unfinished, and ensuring a secure and hopeful future for its people is a duty that Britain must continue to uphold with conviction and compassion.